Canada adopted the metric system in 1975. It was on April the 1st, and most people thought it was a joke. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. On this weekly podcast, topics, discussions, stories from our lives.
Season 10, Chapter 6.
Metric System.
Why Canada's Metric Board chose April the 1st of 1975 to officially go metric is unknown. But almost 50 years later, the majority of Canadians have never known any other system. The rest of us have either adapted or perhaps still do conversions in our head. In 1975, the people who hadn't paid attention to any of the metric system build-up and pre-hype found out about metric by checking the weather forecast. 10 degrees today? What? I thought it was supposed to be 50. What the HE double hockey sticks is going on? Oh, it's April the 1st. Must be some kind of joke. Of all the measurements that would become metric, weight, volume, distance, velocity, and temperature was the first one we really noticed. It wasn't 37 degrees. It was 3. Didn't sound very good. I don't think I like this metric. Technically, Celsius, or centigrade as it's known, is not part of the metric system, but it does fit in nicely being based on 100. Environment Canada is a government agency, so they went full-on cold turkey metric on day one. Media did not. I was in radio at the time, and we converted numbers when we did the weather forecast. Not all of them, but at the end. Tonight's low 8, tomorrow's high 23. Right now it's 16 Celsius or 61 degrees Fahrenheit. And we did this for almost a decade, maybe even longer. We eased into the weather part of metric slower than an old man getting into a warm bath. Water temperature 38 Celsius or 100 degrees Fahrenheit. As someone who's lived with both systems, I still miss Fahrenheit a little bit, especially in the summer. And I'm hearing all the American media. 90 and mostly sunny still sounds better to me than 32 with a few clouds. I had this idea that when we switch the clocks, we should switch temperature measurements, Celsius for winter and Fahrenheit for daylight saving time. However, as switching clocks is also a bad and confusing idea that we should probably end soon, my idea won't happen. The rest of Canada's metric conversion took its time. Labels were changed on cans of tomatoes and a pound of butter. New speed limit signs went up. But wow, look at how the price of gas is down. Oh, wait. That price is per liter, not per gallon. How many liters in a gallon? Well, that about 4. Okay, so 4 times the price. All right. And temperature, Celsius times 2 plus 30. That was the conversion, right? We were constantly doing math. Some of us were grumpy about the whole thing, but as time went on, we accepted it. Had no other choice. Meanwhile, in the United States of America, Jimmy Carter, who took office in 1977, proposed that America go Ametrica. Rejected. Unequivocally, wholeheartedly rejected. Who knows? Maybe that cost him the re-election. Maybe that's why he is trying his best to live to be 100. See, metric works. To this day, the United States, also Liberia and Myanmar, are the only nations in the world to still use the imperial system of measurement. Yes, just 3 countries. Those. Imperial is feet, inches, ounces, miles, et al. Almost no one uses imperial anymore, not even emperors, except the U.S., Liberia and Myanmar. So Canada is metric, United States imperial. Well, hold on a second. We are actually a mix of both. I'll get more into that in a moment. First, the metric system was invented in France. We have the French to thank for metric. It was right around 1789, the French Revolution, citizens rising up against the monarchy, down with kings and queens, and eventually all things imperial. And naturally, eventually this applied to measurement. French scientists calculated a new system based on factors of 10. Much simpler, just like the townsfolk. And how was the length of a meter determined? It was, I guess still is, exactly 1/10,000,000th of the distance from the North Pole to the equator using a path that runs through the French Observatory in Paris. Eventually, they had a steel bar there that was exactly 1 meter long. People would go there and they would bring some wood or some rope that they could measure as 1 meter to that standard and then take it back to their village. They also had an exact kilogram. A kilogram was the weight of a liter of water. Liter came from a previous French name for a measurement. Well, it goes on. Safe to say that by 1795, France was full-on metric. Measurement that was free of the confines of the previous imperialist regime. Monarchy. I fart in your general direction. And the metric was catching on. As far as temperature, we have to go back even further, another 70 years before the French Revolution, and a guy from Gdansk named Dan Fahrenheit. He came up with a system of degrees to measure everything from freezing to boiling. Not content with that system, in less than 20 years after Dan Fahrenheit came up with his, a guy from Sweden named Andy Celsius, I think his deputy called him Ange, came up with this new system based on 100. It would be another half century before the peasants were revolting in France. But eventually, as the Bastille crumbled to the ground, Celsius was integrated into the metric system. Makes sense? Of course, there's a lot more that happened with competing measurements over the years, but there you have the genesis of it. Now you know. It's odd, if you think about it, that the United States remains virtually the last holdout of the imperial system. I mean, their American Revolution partly inspired the French Revolution. Similar themes, the rejection of king and kingdoms, a new nation for the people, of the people, by the people. Yet France went on to invent an entirely new and better system. But for some reason, the U.S. hung on to the old one. And to this day, and while they were rejecting all other imperial values. What was Benjamin Franklin thinking? So the United States is all old school imperial, and Canada is all modern metric. Well, hold on. Not really. Let's start with Canada. And yes, we do use meters and kilometers, kilometers, whatever. We're so cool, we call them clicks. I'm doing almost 100 clicks on the freeway when all of a sudden. But our speed limit signs say, for example, 50 kmh as opposed to mph. mph, of course, miles per hour. And actually our kmh is km/h, kilometers per hour. So you know what a 50k speed limit sign in France would have on it? 50. That's it, just 50. The only reason we also add the kmh to our signs, we live next to America, a land border. It's our little concession. We all know what the 50 means, but Americans don't. So we add the km/h. We are metric, but that's like a nod to those who are still imperialists. And we still use feet and yards, mostly in sports. Baseball, still 90 feet between bases. There's 180-yard par 3 on a golf course. I have golfed with American tourists who asked me if our golf courses are in meters. No. It's funny, the Americas and Scotland, where golf was invented, still use yards. On the European tour, it's meters. I don't know. And horse racing still uses furlongs. Furlong. That may be pre-imperial. Furlong, by the way, was the length of a furrow that an ox could plow in Old England without having to take a rest. Furrow long. Furlong. Usually about 200 yards. So yeah, you pretty much got that right. The French were using their observatory with the stars and the planets to measure an exact distance between the equator and the North Pole, while the English were measuring distance by the approximate length an ox could go before he had to sit down for a bit. It's crazy. What else? Oh, of course, football. It's the Canadian game, but we still use yards. Listen, I've got this terrific idea to make the Canadian Football League, CFL, which is a league that plays American-style football. I know how to make it more Canadian by making it more metric. Hear me out on this. Right now, if you take a quick glance at the NFL or the CFL, they might look almost identical. Of course, we know all the differences. We have a bigger field, ridiculously large end zones, 12 men on the field for each team as opposed to their 11, and 3 downs instead of 4. A bigger field, more players, yet fewer downs. That never made any sense to me. However, we still measure in yards, and our field is 110 yards long as opposed to the U.S., which is 100 yards between goal lines. So here's my idea. 110 yards is exactly 100 meters. We should divide and mark our field up as 100 meters. To start a game, there'd be a coin toss, and the winning team starts out on their own goal line, or maybe the 10, and they have 10 downs to score a touchdown, and only a touchdown. No field goals, because, as commissioner, I would eliminate field goal kickers. I've always hated them anyway. They're not football players. They have soccer skills. And after all the grit of running and passing and blocking and tackling, you shouldn't have some mamby-pamby kicker out there that could determine the outcome of a game. No field goal kickers. So 10 downs to get all the way down the field. You score a touchdown, and now it's the other team's turn. If you fail, you give the ball up wherever you are, and the other team starts going the other way. Because I'd also eliminate punters. You could make a touchdown 10 points, if you like. I'm not that fussy about that. And with no kickers at all, I'd still have a point after attempt, but you would have to run or pass your way to get it. Plus, and this next part is actually Larry David's idea, the point after could be a system like run or pass from the 5, and that's 1 point. But if you choose to try from the 10, it's 2 points, or from the 20, 3 points. I'd cap it at 3 points. I think all of this would make the game infinitely more interesting, be more metric, and more Canadian. Back to metric. Metric Canada still uses a lot of yards, especially in sports. The other imperial areas include cooking. I don't know about you, but I still preheat my oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I have a fairly new stove. I don't even think it has a Celsius option. We still cook and bake pretty much in Fahrenheit. Occasionally, I will see a Euro video or a package instruction that will say something like preheat oven to 180 C. Wait, I usually preheat to 350 and bake for an hour. 180 is 356. That's 6 degrees hotter. Now, 6 is less than 2% of 350, so take 1.7% of an hour, subtract it from 60 minutes, and then screw it. Let's just order in. We still use terms like a cup of flour, a pint of beer, a teaspoon of this, a tablespoon of that. Many of us are trying to drop a few pounds, although if we are trying to drop a few pounds, what do? We start reading the labels for grams of fat. How many grams of fat on the footlong from Subway? We certainly wouldn't eat a dozen donuts in one sitting. Hey, did you have that baby yet? Oh yes, healthy girl, 7 pounds, 6 ounces. Gonna need a bigger house now, looking at one that's over 3,000 square feet. Canada, imperial measures, not fully metric. The United States is also not fully imperial. Oh yeah, it may seem like it, but it's not. For one thing, all of their track and swim athletes have to compete in meters, although running the fastest mile is still a thing in sports culture. The United States has metric money, 100 cents to the dollar, like Canada. Most of the world's money is in factors of 10 and 100 and 1,000 and so on. The euro and the yen are based on 100. Chinese yuan is based on tens. Even the Russian ruble is worth 100 kopecks, metric money. And I'm sure that when Americans spend or try and get some of their metric money from importing and exporting, that all these goods are shipped based on the metric system. Even American traders have to deal in metric. Certainly the drug lords deal in kilos. The U.S., like a lot of us, have our metric medicine, milligrams of this, 5 cc's of that, unless you're just taking a teaspoon of cough syrup. Before digital, many Americans had 35mm cameras, even old 8mm film cameras. Mind you, you could use your 35mm to get a nice 8x10 portrait, 8 inches by 10 inches. Americans also really know their 9, 10, 11, and 12mm handguns. American gun violence is almost all metric. Interesting that Americans still buy gasoline and milk by the gallon, an imperial measure. But it's not even an imperial gallon. For some odd reason, the American gallon is less than the imperial gallon, which nobody uses anyway. And though Americans buy these liquids in gallons, they also buy liters of Pepsi. And yes, Mr. and Ms. American, what is the gas mileage like on your new 5-liter Mustang? Americans are more metric than they probably even realize they are. But still, will they ever go full-on kilometers, kilograms, and Celsius? Doubt it. All American scientists use metric, but of course that's all the world's scientists. As I learned from Neil deGrasse Tyson, it's called System International, which is basically metric, so that all science speaks the same language in helping to advance the world. Engineers, however, took a little while longer to convert to metric. As a matter of fact, you may remember September of 1999. After almost 10 months of travel to Mars, the Mars Climate Orbiter burned up and broke into pieces, all because someone failed to use the right units, the metric units. This is documented. Lockheed Martin, who's the system builder, the engineers were using imperial units to calculate distance in orbit and entry angles and all of that, and they fed the data to NASA. NASA assumed the numbers they were getting were metric. Engineering and science didn't properly convert the numbers. And then $200 million quickly became space dust. Oops. The one measurement in our lives that will never go metric, although I can't speak for the next million years, is time. Metric time would contravene the laws of the universe. Rotation and revolution of the planet takes the time it takes. So I guess we could have 10-day weeks. We could have 36 of them and then have a nice short week. We could have 10 months that would be each 36 days long. But you see, there's just no way to throw factors of 10 into the concept of time without having a lot of leftover fractions. No metric time. Although I will say, remember the metric system was introduced in Canada on an April Fool's Day? Metric time, several years later, was one of the best April Fool's gags ever put on. I wish I could remember who did it, give them proper credit, but it was genius. Some people believed it. A lot of the imperial measures are ingrained in our language. Slow progress means you're inching along. Empathy means walk a mile in someone else's shoes. You know, an ounce of prevention is still worth a pound of cure. And those are fine. I think the metric police will just let those go. Otherwise, the entire world should be metric, across all fields, across all nations, including the holdouts Myanmar, Liberia, and the U.S. As I said, the U.S. will likely never do it. It's probably the one thing they can all agree on. No lefty socialist metric system for us. The other thing I wish the entire world could agree on is what side of the road we drive on. Most of the world drives on the right, also known as the correct side. About 75 countries drive on the left. Most of them are current or former British colonies. So yeah, UK, it's your fault. We have to make those funky right-hand drive vehicles. You know, UK, you drive on the wrong side of the road, and you don't have metric money. You still have pounds and shillings and pence and quids and fivers. You are an imperial troublemaker, like times 10.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.